Welcome to Born to Win. I'm Brian Proctor, and each week I share a message to help you start your week with focus, clarity, and intention. Every episode is designed to remind you that success isn't something you chase, it's something you allow. You were born to win, and when you live in harmony with the laws of life, you begin to experience that truth in every area of your life. Today we're talking about something that quietly shapes the direction of your entire life, the way you speak to yourself. More specifically, we're talking about how to interrupt negative thought loops, how to guide yourself instead of criticize yourself, and how to step into leadership over your own life. So take a deep breath, open your mind, and let's get started. Let me begin by asking you a simple but important question. Would you be friends with someone who spoke to you the way you speak to yourself? Think about that one. You know, for many people, that question lands hard because if we're honest, most of us would never tolerate a relationship where someone constantly criticized us, replayed our mistakes, or reminded us of why we're not good enough. And yet, that is often exactly how we speak to ourselves. Why do we do this? We all know it's not helpful. Still, day after day, many of us live with an inner critic running in the background. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's loud, but it is there, judging nearly every move we make. Now, what I want to do here is bring this into your awareness, not just the fact that it's happening, but how deeply it influences your confidence, your decisions, and your sense of self. And more importantly, I want to give you the tools to change it, to stop tearing yourself down, to begin guiding yourself with intention, and to become your own greatest support and your own biggest cheerleader. So let's start by understanding the inner critic, because there is actually value in not trying to silence it completely. We do learn important lessons from making mistakes, and that inner voice can serve as a reminder to pay attention and not repeat the same behavior. The issue is not that we make mistakes or even that we fail. Those experiences, they're not bad. What makes them feel so uncomfortable is that failure often feels threatening. It can feel like our sense of safety, identity, or worth is at risk. That's why it helps to pause. Step back and reframe the moment. When you widen your perspective and look at the bigger picture, you can separate learning from self-attack. Mistakes, they become information, not verdicts, and failures, they become feedback rather than something to fear. When I was young, I'd go to my dad with something that felt big and terrible, and he had a way of immediately changing my perspective. He would look at me and he'd ask two simple questions. Did anybody die? And then he would ask, did you learn anything? Those two questions had a way of cutting through the fear, the drama, and the self-punishment. They reminded me that most of what we label as tragedy is really just intensity and often wild imagination. I remember one moment in particular when I made a mistake that in my mind felt overwhelming. Fear and shame took over instantly. But my father, he calmly brought me back to what actually mattered. Everyone was okay. Nothing irreversible had happened, and there was something to be learned. So without lecturing, he showed me that circumstances do not assign meaning. We do. I learned that a mistake does not have to become a verdict, and a difficult moment does not have to define you. When you learn to respond with a wider lens instead of reacting with emotion, you take back your power. You stop letting the moment control you, and you begin leading yourself through it. It's important to understand that the tendency to be our own worst critic rarely comes out of nowhere. It's often rooted in self-doubt and really habitual ways of thinking that were formed early in life. This inner voice usually develops from deeply ingrained paradigms shaped by childhood experiences, environment, and expectations of others. Often self-criticism, it can begin as a defense mechanism, a way to stay safe, to avoid making mistakes, or to gain approval. Over time, that pattern gets reinforced until it becomes automatic. So when stress shows up or something feels uncertain, falling right back into the familiar cycle of negative thoughts and emotional reactions is a deep groove, even when it no longer serves us. Living with that inner critic is not motivating. It's like having a bad friend who never leaves and really who never has anything encouraging to say. Most of us know what it feels like to get stuck in our own head, replaying the same thoughts over and over. But what's important to understand is that you are not powerless here. You can learn to lower the volume on that inner critic. And when you have tools to redirect your thinking and replace criticism with intention, you create the space for real, empowering change to take place. A simple but incredibly impactful tool that my father used was the word next. It was a command from himself to himself. When he first introduced it from the stage, he would shout the word out loud and clap his hands firmly to punctuate it. It immediately captured everyone's attention. But this was never a gimmick. I watched him use this tool throughout his life. Sometimes he said it silently. Sometimes he said it out loud. Either way, he was deliberately interrupting a thought pattern that, if left unchecked, could turn into a loop and eventually become a habit. And that's important because all habits begin with repetition. That includes negative habits, and in this case, negative thinking. When you understand that what you repeatedly say to yourself becomes what you believe, you begin to see why this matters so much. Because what you believe determines how you act, and how you act ultimately becomes your life. Now here is something critical to understand. Thoughts move through your mind the way clouds move through the sky. Some thoughts are useful, and some are not. And just because a thought appears does not mean it deserves your attention. You have the ability to use your higher mental faculty of reason to decide which thoughts you will attach emotion to and which ones you will simply allow to pass by. So I want to strongly encourage you to be discerning here. Not every thought deserves your attention and energy. All of us experience limiting thoughts that surface from early conditioning and past experiences. They can feel urgent, but they are programs, and programs can be interrupted. The moment you begin choosing which thoughts you give your attention to, you take a significant step into self-leadership. Now, I want to shine a spotlight on another important aspect of self-talk, and that is the language you use when you talk about yourself to other people. Spend some time paying attention to what you say out loud. How do you describe yourself? Even when you're joking, be mindful of language that puts you down. When you speak that way, you are reinforcing an identity. It may seem harmless, but it isn't. Do not confuse humility with diminishing yourself. Being self-effacing is not the same thing as being grounded. You should always be moving toward becoming the best version of yourself, not keeping yourself small to make others comfortable. Notice if you're telling stories about why you can't do something, because your greatest enemy is not only the voice inside your head, but also the identity you reinforce with your words out loud. Language matters. Always. I love this quote from Mike Dooley. He said, "Thoughts become things, and your words are your wings." Consider for a moment that everything you believe about your world is your perspective. It is your truth, but is not necessarily the truth. When you question why you believe certain things about yourself, you create space for change. When you detach from a situation and approach it with curiosity instead of judgment, you are taking a step towards self-leadership. Begin by asking yourself, where did I learn this? Is this actually true or just familiar? Does this belief support the new version of me that I am working toward? Remember who you really are. Your spiritual DNA, man, it's perfect. It does not need to be fixed. What it needs is awareness. Most of the limits that you have put on yourself were absorbed early in life, from parents, teachers, culture, religion, even our environment. And because they were absorbed unconsciously, they feel permanent. But they are not. And once you realize that, you regain the power to choose. So how you choose to live matters. Your future is built on daily awareness and daily decisions. Make sure those decisions are yours, not someone else's idea of who you should be. I want to share an experience that I recently had. I was at a gathering celebrating a couple who had moved into a new home. I ended up talking with a man I'd never met before. He was kind, he was intelligent, but he was clearly struggling. As we spoke, he repeatedly criticized himself out loud. He even called himself a loser, kind of half joking, but fully believing it. It was painful to listen to. I gently challenged him and said he could stop that pattern right now with a simple decision. Well, he pushed back immediately. "It's not that simple," he said. What struck me wasn't the resistance, it was how attached he was to the story. The misery had become familiar, even safe. You know, my father used to say, everyone needs this awareness and understanding, but not everyone wants it. You can only help those who are willing to begin. And if you're listening to this, I know something about you. There's a part of you that imagines more and wants to grow. And I want you to understand, it is possible. Don't overcomplicate this. This work really is simple. Not easy, but simple. You don't fix everything at once. You start with awareness, then interruption, then redirection. You can use my father's tool, next. The next time you catch yourself in self-criticism, ask, would I say this to someone I care about? If the answer is no, it's not acceptable to say to yourself either. Now add this leadership question. If someone were watching how I speak to myself right now, would they feel inspired or discouraged? Because whether you realize it or not, you are always teaching. You teach people how to treat you, and you are showing them if they should respect you or not. Start by respecting yourself. My wife has a tool that she likes to use. Whenever something comes up that feels like a criticism, she says, I like that about myself. It definitely changes the conversation. So let's get to a practical exercise that you can try this week, the self-talk reset. First, catch it. Notice when self-criticism appears. This is you using your awareness. Next, test it. Ask, would I say this to a friend? And last, shift it. Say next, out loud or in your mind, and replace the thought with one that supports you. Do this consistently. Small shifts repeated daily, they create lasting change. Becoming the leader of your life does not mean you never struggle. It means you stop abandoning yourself when things get difficult. You'll learn to guide yourself through challenge instead of turning against yourself. When you take on that role, you become the captain of your own team. And when this becomes your daily way of operating, others naturally begin to trust you, learn from you, and follow your example. Not because you tell them what to do, but because of how you live. Thank you for joining me today on Born to Win. If this message resonated with you, please share it with someone who could use a reminder of their own inner greatness. It also helps me to reach more people if you rate and follow this podcast. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Brian Proctor Official. And remember, success isn't about luck or timing. It's about alignment. You were designed for success, built for expansion, and born to win. I'll see you next Monday. Until then, think big, trust yourself, and keep growing.